Hi everyone, trust you all are doing well. So welcome to our NEXT.js Crash Course. Now this course will be available in two formats. It's going to be available in a playlist format, as some of our community members actually love the shorter videos, and I'm going to leave it in a longer format, so all in one video. Now the reason for this course is we created a Laravel API for the backend, and we're going to use NEXT.js for the client side. So if you're new to the channel, so I'm going to explain this course mostly for people that don't even know React or don't even know JavaScript. It will be helpful, but not necessary, so that we can all basically start from the same point when we actually create the client side for our API. Now, what is NEXT.js? NEXT.js is basically a React framework for production. Now, in this case, it's a framework for a framework. Now, React technically is a library, but NEXT.js makes it much easier actually to build React applications. It basically simplifies the whole process. It pre-renders HTML, which in our case, it is very useful for SEO. So technically, NEXT.js is a full stack framework because you can actually build an API with NEXT.js, but I love doing it with Laravel, as I know Laravel and PHP quite well, but you can do it with NEXT.js. You can do everything from it itself. Anyway, what tools do you need? We need two tools. We need Node.js for our packages, and we need a code editor. For code editor, I'm using Visual Studio Code, or you can use Sublime or Atom or whatever code editor you prefer. Now, for Node.js, you can go to the website. So if you're watching this in the future, yours might look a little bit different in the version. So in this case, you can use 16.14 or you can use 17.6. So recommended for most users. Choose whatever one you prefer. You can download for your operating system, and you can do the same for your code editor. In my case, I'm using Windows. And you can use OS or Mac OS or Linux. All right, so that's it. So install it, and I'll see you guys in the next part where we can actually start just in creating a Next.js app, and I'll explain everything to you right there. Let's create our Next.js app. But before we do that, just make sure you have Node.js installed. So you can just type in Node-V like this, and as you can see, I'm using version 16.13.1. If you don't see anything that on error, please make sure that you install Node.js, because you're going to need it to build this in Next.js. Right, so let's quickly create our Next.js app. So in order to create one, all we do is npx, right, and we can just say create. And now, if you're using React, you would have had to type in the React app and the name of app. So name of app. All right, but since we're using Next.js, all we have to do in here is we're going to just say next app, and obviously the name of the app. So I'm just going to call this one articles, or let's just call it some simple just course like this. All right, so if you're used to Laravel, what we would have done is we would have done Laravel new, and obviously the name of the app. But this is how we create basically a Next.js app. So press enter. Now, this will take a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds, depending on your system. So I'll see you after this. All right, my application is finished installing. So what I will do is I'll send CD into that course folder. So as you can see, I'm in it. Let me just clear this. So I'm in that, basically that folder. So if I go code, because I want to open this with Visual Studio Code, I just type in code period. So press enter. All right, so as you can see, we got it all installed. All right, so I'll quickly go over the structure of, as you can see right here. So as you can see with Next.js, you can see it's quite a minimalistic framework. So not too much happening right here. So compared to Laravel, you will see there's a whole lot of things happening right there. So as you can see right here, this is basically your app right here. Now, the thing is, you don't need to worry about the README right here. Okay, so you don't need to worry about that. Now, the package.json, let's start off with the package.json. This right here, this is basically your file for your dependencies and your scripts. Now, let's start off with the scripts right here. Now, the scripts, you will see npm run dev. So this part right there, if we do npm run dev, if we do this, it will run this script. Now, this script will call that, and it will basically run. Now, this, if you're used to Laravel, this will normally compile all your JavaScript. Now, in this case, what it will do, it will spin up a local server for you. So let's press enter. So as you can see, it spins up a local server, but it will do it on port 3000. Now, the thing is, if we did this in order to basically run a local server in Laravel, what we would have done is we will say PHP artisan serve, And this will basically start up a local server, but on port 8000. All right. So this is more or less the same as that. So this one will start it on 3000 and the other one will start it on port 3000. We will view this in a second. And the next one is the build one right here. So if you finish creating your app, you're quite happy and you want to send it off to production, you run the npm run build and it will actually compile it to be able to be sent to production. Now this part right here, the start one, it will basically run your compiled app in production mode. And lint obviously, so it's just making sure that whatever, if you have any errors, it will kind of show you that. All right, so this is basically our dependencies is Next.js, React, and the React DOM. And your dev dependencies in this case is ESLint and ESLint config. Now the thing is, whenever you're going to install a dependency, now in my case, I don't like to, because I'm going to get to the styles part right here, I don't like to write my own CSS. I like to use Tailwind or Bootstrap. That's totally dependent on you anyways. So if you do any of that installations, now in our case, we're going to use Axios, and that will be installed right here. So Axios or Tailwind or anything, all those kind of things will basically your dev dependencies in here. All right, so that's it. So that's our package.json. And this is our next config.js file right here. So you don't need to worry anything about this for our beginner course. No need to be concerned about this. This is basically just configurations. All right, so the next thing is the get ignore. This one you don't have to bother. And the ESLint RC, you don't have to worry about that. Now the next part right here. So if you like to write your own CSS, you can be concerned with the style CSS. Now if you want to basically add global styling, you will add it in here. And if you want to add a specific styling, now in this case it's for the home page. Now if you have an about or services or whatever pages, you can actually basically create modules for each page that's relevant for the CSS. Now the next thing is the public folder right here. Now anything that you put in here, just remember any static assets that you put in this folder will be available publicly. So if you don't want anything in there that's public, don't put it inside this folder right here. Now the pages folder, this is basically where we're going to do all of our magic right here. But I want to basically go over this in the next episode, but I'm just want to leave everything in here. So let me just give you just a quick overview. Now the index page in your pages folder right here. So this one right here, this is the page that's going to be served to the front end. So if we go to /home, right, so this is, as you can see, if we go to localhost 3000, the one that the local server that we just spun up, as you can see, you can go start editing the pages.index. So this is basically the page that gets served up right here. So if we make any changes in here, it will happen right there. So let's just quickly remove the head. Right, so as you can see, that won't do anything. So let me just remove this H1. So as you can see, it removes it right there. So this is basically our page that we serve to the / the main root index right there. Okay, so I will quickly go over this structure in the next episode because this is quite important in terms of routing. Because as you can see, if you're using Laravel, you will have a route folder. In Next.js, you don't have a folder like that, and I want to explain why in the next episode. So we're going to be dealing with the pages folder right here. There's quite a lot of content that we have to cover, so we'll be broken up into a couple of episodes. So let's start off with the first one, the index.js. So this is basically what we see when we spin up a local server. In order to do that, you just open up your terminal and then run npm run dev and click the link for the local host 3000. Okay, so let me just minimize this. So let's start off everything inside your index.js, Control all and delete it. All right. Now, I'm doing this quite deliberately because I want you guys to not be afraid of any errors that you might get. It's all part of the learning process. So as you can see, this is basically how an error page will look like. So we will get a server error, and the error is the default export is not a React component, and it will show you at which page it is. So inside there, as you can see, the index.js is referring to the / is this page right here. Now, React is a component-based library. It was created that way. Now, in order to create a component in React / Next.js, we can create them in two ways. We can create a class-based component, or we can create a function-based component. Right, so we got a function component, or we can have a class component. Now this is ES6 is made use of class components, but this is just synthetic sugar on top of the previous JavaScript. but you can create classes in JavaScript. Now let's quickly create a class component. In order to create a class component, if you're used to PHP, you can just type in class and you can put the name of the class. This must be capital letters as the standard, so class, and then we can just say extends. All right, now it extends. In this case, it will be React.component like this. Okay, so now we created our class right there. Now you will see if I press save, we're going to get an error. Now, as you can see, React is not defined. Now, in order to define it, what we do in JavaScript, we put import, okay, and then we're just going to say React from, and then we can just say React like that. All right, so now we may get access to React. Now, in order to make use of the React, we basically have it in when we do the Next.js installation. You will see in the dependencies right there, you will see we got the React installed like this. Okay, so that's why we're making use of it like that. All right, so if you just wonder where that is coming from. Okay, now you'll see we see that the default is not a React component, so we still get the same error. Now, in order to get the error to disappear and it's actually part of React, we need to export the default of the name of the component that we just created. Now, in this case, it's called home right there. All right, so in a class-based component, there's obviously a couple of things missing because there's nothing that's being returned. All right, now in order to return anything, as you can see, the render is not a function, so we need to add that in there. So render, okay, so that is the first part. And if we save that, you will see we get a missing, it's not returning anything. So we need to return something in here. So what we want to return is we want to return just an H1. Okay, and an H1, in this case, I'm just going to call it home. So as you can see, there we got our home right there. So the errors disappear, and this is basically our class-based component. So you can do it in two ways. You can do it this way, or you can remove everything in there. So let's just remove the export, edit in front of the class, and then you can do everything like that. That's most people's preferred way to do it, but I like to use arrow functions, and I cannot do this with arrow functions, which we're going to get to in a second, and I'm doing this at the end right there. Okay. Now, this is basically, let me just minimize this. So this is basically our class-based component right there. Now, another note that I just want to mention. Normally, you will not just return an H1 like this. Okay, you will normally want to add additional content. As you can see, I'm getting an error right there. So let us see the error. As you can see, failed to compile. This is another error that you will get as well. Undermined the regex literal. Okay, so how do we fix this? Now, in React, you must put everything under one main component. So in main element actually. So in this case, all right. So in this case, it can be an empty fragment. So this is part of React. So you can either put it in an empty fragment, or you can put it in, like in this case, let's say you're at the main like this. All right. So as you can see, no error right there, as long as it's between the main elements like this. But in my case, I love to use empty fragments like this. You can use it like this, or you can use a fragment like that. Let me just add it in here. Or you can use it like that. But when you use it like this, you must make sure you import it right there as well. All right, so that is basically how you can do it. But just make sure it's between a main element like this. Now, in my case, like I said, I like to use the empty fragment. All right, now this is basically a class-based component. So let's quickly create a function component. So let's remove everything. Right, so you can see we can still get the same error. So if in order to create a function component, we just have used the keyword function, the name of the function. So in our case, home, just remember the convention is capital. All right, and then we just return something. Let's just, without returning anything, let's just do a function like this. As you can see, the export default. So let's just add our export default in there. And let's add the home, return it. As you can see, it renders or returns nothing. So let's quickly return something in here. Now, so now you must know just the root elements. So in this case, like this. So we got our fragment, and then in there we can just type our H1, and I'm just going to say home like that. As you can see, we get our home right here. So this is one way to do the function, or like many people prefer, to put the export in front of that, so they don't have to worry about forgetting to add the export default in there. So if I save that and I refresh it, you can see we still get the same thing. All right, so that is one way to create a component with a class-based or function-based. Now, this part is my favorite part to create components, and that is the ES6 way to create a function, and we're going to call that arrow functions. So we create a constant, and we call that home, and then we're just going to put parentheses, and then we create the arrow, and then we just return the same thing. Okay, so in this case, we're just going to return with a fragment, actually not like that, a fragment, and we're just going to type in h1, and I'm just going to say home arrow. Okay, now we're just going to get the same arrow, export default, so just remember, export default and home right there. Okay, so as you can see, home arrow. So that's basically how we can create components in React. In our case now is Next.js. So that is just standard React right now. So we haven't delved in the Next.js part, but since we're just doing completely beginner course, I just want to go over the basics. All right, so this is my favorite way to do it. So you can obviously choose how you want to do it. Now, I just wanted to mention this, the difference between class-based and function-based. Now, if you have any logic that you want to deal with inside your component, use class-based components, okay? If you want to carry the state, or let's say handle the logic, local, basically the local state, you can use class-based components for that, all right? And mostly anything that can be done using React hooks in function components. So you will see quite a lot of people using function components, either the arrow functions or the normal functions, all right? Because there's quite a lot of React hooks that you can use to do the more or less the same than you can do with class components, okay? So we finished up with creating components. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to learn how to create pages with their routes in Next.js. But before we do that, let's quickly show you two extensions, because I know someone might ask what extensions am I using. So let's quickly go in here to my extensions. You're going to look for Next.js snippets. All right, this one right here. So just by Gangwell, just make sure that you get that one if you want it installed. Now what that does is just allows you to create components just with a couple of basically characters. Now the next one is the Next.js React snippets right here. So this one is quite nice as well. So that's totally up to you. Okay. Now let's move on. So this is basically if we want to add a page. So I want to add an about page and I want to add a services page, but the services like this and a nested services with a services 1 and a services 2 right here. So how do we do that in Next.js? Now, Next.js, all you have to remember is making use of a file-based routing system. So what that means is whatever files you add in here will be available publicly via the route. So let me make an example. So let me just create a new file in here, and I'm going to call this one docs.js, and I'm just going to basically create an arrow function. So as you can see, just docs right there. Now the convention is this part right here, the constant, and the export, just make sure it is capitalized like that. Okay, that is just a convention. I'm just going to do an h1, and I'm going to say docs like this. Okay, so let's quickly go to that URL. So we added that file in there, docs.js, and if we go to /docs, as you can see, there you can see it right there. So Next.js deals and handles the routing system automatically at the back end, all right, in its part right there, while checking what files are inside that pages folder and create the routes accordingly. All right, so that's an example. So let's quickly delete this. So let's quickly create our about page right there. As you can see, now that we deleted that page, as you can see, the page is no longer found. Okay, so let's quickly create an about page. Now this page we can create in two ways. Now we have seen the first way. So if we do the first way, so about.js, so let's quickly create an arrow function for that. So I'm just going to add an about, and I'm going to do an h1. Let's do an h1, and I'm just going to say about page. Okay, so that is the first way to do it. So let's go to /about quickly. So if we go in there, about, as you can see, we're on the about page. Now, the other way to do it is if you create a folder. So let's quickly create a folder, and I'm going to call this one about. And then inside this folder, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this one index.js. Now, the index.js is the home page of the folder that you're in. Okay, so just remember that. Okay, so let's quickly create another arrow function, or you can create normal functions, or you can create a class component, if you guys remember from the previous episode. So this one, I'm just going to say about like this, and I'm going to say an h1, and I'm going to call this one folder about. Now, there is a reason for my madness where I'm creating two about pages, because I want to show you something. Now, the about this page right here will take precedence. Okay, so the about page folder right here with the index, this page will be ignored because there's already a file. So the file will take precedence over the folder right there. So just remember that. Okay, so let me quickly delete this file and you'll see what happens here. So let me quickly delete it. So as you can see, the folder about appears right there. Okay, so that's basically two ways you can create a file basically, or a page, I need to say, in Next.js with its URI. Okay, so that's the first one. So we dealt with this one right here. So we know how to create that. And obviously you can add a lot of additional content right here. Whatever you need to do in this component, I'm just showing you the basics. All right, so let's quickly go to the next one. So we want to create a services with a services 1 and a services 2 nested files. All right, so we know how to create a folder right now. So let's go to the pages right here, create a new folder, and I'm calling this one services right there. Now let's quickly go in here and we're going to create an index.js. All right, so if we go to just /services, then we're going to get to this index page. Okay, so let's just quickly do that. So as you can see, the snippets is quite handy. It makes it quite easy to do it. So I'm just going to say services right here, and I'm just going to do an H1, and I'm just going to call it services. So let's go to /services right there. Right, practice is always good. So the more you do, the better you get into the habit of doing it. So just follow along. All right. So that's basically, we got our services page, the services and the index right there. Now that's not what we wanted to do, but we want to get to this page right here. The next thing that we want to do is we want to go to the services 1 and services 2. So how do we do that? Now, if we go to the services folder right here and we create a new file, and in here we do a services 1.js. All right, and let's create another one. Another one is services 2.js. All right, so that's basically our two files. This one is just service. So let me just rename that, make sure, because React will basically Next.js, pardon me, will create a route based on the file name right there. Okay, so that's basically our services 1. So let's quickly create an arrow function, and I'm just going to call this 1, and I'm just going to say H1, and I'm just going to say service 1. So we know we're on this page right here. Let's go to services 2 right here, and we're going to do an arrow function again, and I'm just going to say 2 return, and I'm just going to do an H1, and I'm just going to say service 2 right there. That's how easily you can create a nested one. So let's quickly see if we go to services 1 and services 2. So let's just go to /services, and let's go to service 1. Right, as you can see that page, all right, there needs to be services. So as you can remember, so as you can see there, we're on service 1. Okay, let's go to service 2. Right there, as you can see, we get to service 2. That's how easily we can add a page in Next.js with its routes, and you can create a nested files that easily with Next.js with its nested routes as well. It handles all of that for you out of the box. You don't need to configure anything. All of that is done out of the box. All right, so there's another thing that we need to now find out. Now, let's say you have a blog. So if we go to localhost, and we're going to just do this, and we're going to do products or articles. Let me just do a simple one. Articles /1, articles /2, because all of these kind of data we get from the database. So how do we deal with that? Now, Next.js has got that covered for us as well. So how do we do dynamic routing in Next.js? Now in this case, we want to go to localhost 3000 /articles and whatever dynamic value at the end right here. So this can be 1, or it can be 2, or it can even be a slug. So I'm just going to put a slug like this. All right, that's basically how do we do this in Next.js. All right, now this is quite easy. Now you already know how to do nested routes. So in order to do a dynamic route, as you can see, we need to create a folder called articles, and then whatever we need to put in there. So let's quickly create that folder. So folder, in this case, we just want to go to /articles, but I want an index for all the articles. So in here, I just want to create a new file, and I'm going to call this one index.js. Now then I want to create an arrow function, and I'm just going to call this one articles. And I'm just going to create an H1, all right, of articles. So let's quickly go there. So if we go to /articles now, you can see we get the articles. All right, so we already know how to do this right now. Now the next thing is, if we want to go to /1, we're going to get a 404. This page could not be found. All right, how do we extract that value right there? So in order to create a dynamic route, all you have to do now, this is important, this have to be this way, this is the convention, 2 square brackets .js and whatever value that you want to be dynamic. Now in my case, you can do article ID like this, or you can put slug, totally up to you. Right, in my case, I'm just going to make it simple. I'm just going to make it id.js. Right, and then I'm going to create an arrow function, and I'm going to call this one article. Let's make it single article. All right, so as you can see, single article, and I just return an H1 with a single article right there. Now, the important part right here is, I'm just going to type it out here. You need to put it between 2 square brackets .js. That is the most important part. And this can be anything in there, but just if you put in ID, it makes sense. Just kind of use your common sense when you do that as well. All right. So in this case, I'm going to do it with an ID. But how do we extract that value right there? So as you can see, if I go to /1, we get the same page. Or if I go to 2, we get the single article. Now, if I go to string, you'll see I'll get to that same page right there. Okay. So this can be anything. This can be a number, or it can be a string. Right. So now how do we get that value right there? So let's quickly make this number 4. So how do we extract that value? Now, there's a React hook that we can use. Now, this is quite easy for me. So I can do a constant like this. All right. And I can just put router. Then I'm going to equal that to use router. Use router like this. Now, if I do this, it will import it automatically at the top. All right. So if you don't want to do that, let me just quickly show you. So import. All right. So we import the React hook. We can just say use router like this from Next.js, right? So just think of the import like a namespace that you will use in Laravel or PHP. So just think import this part right here from that part right there. Okay, more or less the same, but not exactly. All right, so this is, so how do we get this right here? So now I can use it. So we can say constant. We can just say a router. Then I can equal that to, just give us some room so you guys can easily see. So then I can just say use router like this. Remember, in JavaScript, we can leave the semicolons or we can add it right there. Totally up to you. Now let's move on. The next part right here, this is the parameter part that we want to extract. Now this can be param like this, or this can be ID, just to kind of, if someone looked at the code, they will understand what it is. So in this case, I'm leaving it as ID. Now on that router that we have right here, okay, what I want to do is we can run a query on that. Now the query is going to be equal to the ID. Now the ID right here is important. So this ID must correspond to what you put in between the 2 brackets right there. So if you put article ID, then you have to put in here article ID like this. Okay. So that is very, very important. So in my case, I named it ID. So that's what I'm going to leave it as. So what I want to do now is I just want to display that ID, single article of what ID. Let me just do like this with the curly braces. And then I just put in the ID like that. So as you can see, single article 4. So let's quickly go to another one. Let's put slug. Just an example. As you can see, I get the slug right there. So if I go to 5, it returns that value like that. Okay. So that's basically how we can work with dynamic routes in Next.js. But this is obviously not how you're going to use it, but I'm just showing you how to edit right there. But we're going to get to a little bit more advanced part about getStaticProps and getStaticProps. We're still going to get to that part right there. So let's build a simple navigation. And as you can see, right now we have to manually go to the URL and actually type in the URL that we want to see. So if we click on that, as you can see, it also does a full page refresh, right? And that's not what we're looking for. So what we're looking for is a single page application style. So if I go between the different URLs, the page mustn't refresh, in that case, losing our state. Now let's start off. There's a special component that we have in Next.js called link. So in order to make use of it, we just do an import link from Next.js link right there. So just make sure that you bring it in like this. So how do we use this in our application? Now we have to treat it just like we do a normal HTML. So in this case, I'll just say link like this, right? So as you can see, we have an opening tag like this and a closing link tag like that. All right. So in another part right here is this is just a convention. You have to put an anchor tag between it, but without the href. The href goes onto a special place. We're going to remove the href from this one, and we have to add it to the opening tag of our link right there. So just go in there. So as you can see, this is an opening link tag, and this is a closing link, and then we have an anchor tag in between those ones right there. And in here, we add basically our about page right there. And then where you want to navigate to, you add in the link opening tag / about, like this. All right. So that is the convention, how to use it. All right. So let's quickly create other ones as well. So we got one for the about. Now we need one for the articles and one for the services. Let me quickly create those. Right, so as you can see right now, so we got the link for articles, link for services right here. So if I click on the about right here, so let me click it, you will see no page refresh. Let me go back. So if I click on articles, you will see no page refresh. So that's kind of the navigation that we're looking for. Now, I just want to leave this as a caveat for you guys. Now, this you only use for your navigation in your application, right? So if you want to basically, let's say you have an external link to Google or wherever, or a website that's not on your website, in this case on localhost 3000 or whatever domain you have, you need to use the anchor tag for that. All right. Now, let me just show you. Let's say you use the anchor tag for internal, basically navigation. Let's go to / about, and I will just put this about right here. Okay. So remember, that's the last one. So let me just comment this one's out. So if I click on the about right here, just look at this right here, you will see it refreshes. So if I click there, it actually sends a new request to that page. And that's not a kind of navigation that we're looking for. And that's why there's a special link component created to have that authentic single page application feel. All right. So just remember that. So if you're using internally, you're using this one. If you're going to use for external links, you use the normal anchor tag that you used to. All right. So now we sit with another problem. Right. So let's go to the about right here. So the homepage. So if I click on articles, you can see I go to the articles, but now I have to copy all of this stuff and move to the articles and go to the index and paste it in here in order to kind of have that same navigation. So let me just quickly. Right, so that's basically link is not defined, so we obviously have to make sure that we bring it in. So let me just import that. So import link. Right now, as you can see, now I'm in the articles. So if I go to the about page, you will see we can go there. And now the problem is I have to do that with all the different pages. And that is not what we're looking for, because in coding, there's a principle called the dry principle. And that means don't repeat yourself. So how do we do that in Next.js? And that I will discuss with you in the next episode, because we have to deal with this little file right here called the app.js regarding layout. So in the previous episode, we dealt with the links in order to create a nav. In order to make our navigation work, we had to basically duplicate this code right through the different pages. Now that violates the dry principle on coding, meaning don't repeat yourself. So that's why we're going to discuss this component right here, or this file. So underscore app.js right here. Now this is a very, very powerful file right here. By default, you don't need to modify it a lot. So you can just leave it as is. But if you want to add some default layouts, this is quite handy to do that. So that's what we're going to do. And everything basically in Next.js gets handled by this file. It's also very good if you want to basically handle the state between different components. Very, very good for that as well. So let's start off with the first one. This is the global CSS, which we're not going to discuss in this episode, because we're going to deal with the styles in the next episode, because I want to show you guys how to work with this and how to install Tailwind and Bootstrap, because I like to use the CSS frameworks like Tailwind or Bootstrap, and I don't like to write my own CSS. Just don't want to kind of keep it to a minimum. All right, let's start off with the first one. We got a component right here. Now, what is a component? Now, the component just refers to any page under the pages folder right here that gets served in the browser. So if we go to the articles right there, that's the one that gets viewed. So if we go to the home page, that's the component that basically gets viewed right there. Now, the next thing is, what is a prop? It's because you will see the page props right here. Now, a prop in React just refers to a property. Now, right, in layman's terms, it's just data that get passed from one component to the next. But we must remember that the direction is unidirectional, so meaning it can only get passed from the parent to the child. All right, so that's basically just a quick summary of this file right here. So that you guys, when you see it, don't be alarmed. You don't need to change a lot, but I'm going to show you how to create a default layout. Now, there's a convention on how to do this. All right, so the first one is you have to create a folder, and you're going to call this one components. Okay, so if you guys see this, you will know from Laravel that we have a components file inside our views for our blade components. All right, so we got a components file right here. So what we do is we create a new file in here, and we're going to call this one layout. Now, just remember, this can be pastel case or lowercase. All right, so that's totally up to you. So I'm just going to keep it Pascal. So we're going to have our layout, actually layout singular. All right, so that's our first one. So we're going to create three. We're going to create the navigation one. So that's for our nav.js. So you can keep it lowercase or Pascal. All right, the next one is the footer.js. All right, so let's go to our layout right here. So obviously we need to create an arrow function or whatever one you prefer. So I like to create arrow functions. I like to deal with them. So that's our layout. But just remember, we're going to receive children right here, because we're going to, I will show you in a second. And then we're just going to render the children. All right, so that's our layout all done. So let's go to our app.js file right here. So in order to basically make use of our layout, we need to wrap our component basically with our layout. So let's just quickly do that. So I'm just going to bring in our layout. So as you can see, when I do that, it automatically imports it for me right there. Okay, so let me just do this. So now I'm wrapping my component basically with my layout component like this. Okay, so we import it. So import, so I don't want to type out all of that. So you can just import it right here. So import layout from components basically means you have to go out of this file. All right, so that's what the double dots is. And then you're going to look for the components in the components, and then you're going to go to that layout. Okay, awesome stuff. So that's basically how we can set up our layout right there. But our layout file is not finished yet, because we still need to make use of the different components of the navigation and the footer. But in the layouts right here, I just want to explain the children right here. The children is the children that we receive that's between our layout, basically our element tags, basically our layout right there. So this is the children that we pass to the component, and then we just render them right there. Okay, so let's quickly go to the nav and quickly create this component. So I'm just going to create that. So that's our nav, and I'm just going to do a nav like this. And in here, just remember, we're not going to do a UL, LR. I'm just going to do a link like this. If you guys remember from a previous episode, we discussed this right here. So I'm creating an anchor tag, but the anchor tag needs to go onto the opening tag of your link right there. But we obviously need to make sure we import this. Right, so let's just quickly import the link. So it's just going to say import link from Next.js, just like that. Okay, so we just may have to make sure you import it, otherwise you're going to get an error. So let's start off with the first navigation. This one is for the home page, and I'm just going to call this one home. I'm just going to duplicate this for all the other ones. All right, so now we got our links right here. So we got a link with an href for the home, about, articles, and services. Just remember, this just refers to if this is not nested. So let me just quickly show you. So as you can see, if we go to /about, in the about is the index right there. So it's not nested. In the articles, the index for the articles right there, and the service, the index for the services right there. So if I wanted to go to the services one, I obviously have to kind of specify it a little bit different too, like this, to services, services one. Right, so obviously I'm not going to do that for this one. I just want to go to /services, just to kind of keep it simple. For the footer right here, let's quickly create another arrow one. So this one, just remember, this is a footer element in HTML, but in this case is JSX and not actually HTML. So in this, we're just going to say copy right 2022. just like that. So now we got our footer and our nav right here. Now, what I want to do is I want to use those components inside my layout component right here. And I just want to make this an empty fragment. And this one, I'm just going to bring in my nav right here. So there's our nav. But instead of making it with an opening and closing tag in React, you can actually have a self-closing component just like that. All right, so let's do the same for the footer as well. / just like that. So as you can see, it's we basically mention it, but we haven't imported the components yet. So let's quickly bring them in. So import nav from, right? Now we just go outside. Now we're still in the same folder, / and then we can just go to the nav. Let's just put the nav first. Nav, and then we just do the same for the footer. Import footer from footer. All right. So there's basically our footer all done. So this is duplicated right now because inside our index.js, let's go there and remove this right now since we don't need it anymore. All right. And I'm just going to add some lorem ipsum, say 20, just like that. All right. So as you can see, I like the navigation without the refresh, which is quite nice for a Next.js app. All right, so let's quickly close this off. All right, so as you can see, if I go to the home page right here, we're using the same navigation. If we go to the about, same navigation, articles and services. All right, so that's basically how you can set it all up. You create a components folder with all your different components. Now you can even do nested in here. So you can say, let's say we have a buttons one, and inside here, we can create a new component called primary. All right, .js, all right, and you can even do new folder, and we can do a secondary. Totally up to you. You can structure it, but there's conventions out there so that you can follow and just use, if you're in a team, use whatever you use in your team. Just kind of learn how they do it and stick to that. All right, so because if someone comes to your code right now, if someone have to come and look at this file, they will know all my components is in here. All right, that's the convention. And they will know all my pages is in here. So when they see a folder, they will probably know, just going to look, okay, so this, they will know this is dynamic, all that kind of stuff. Just stick with the conventions. So if someone else works with your code, it's quite easy for them. So let's quickly go to the app right here. So that's basically how we can set up a default layout in our application. So what we're going to do in the next episode, we're going to deal with the styling. So as you can see right now, everything looks dull and boring. So we want to make it look a little bit nicer. So I'll kind of show you how to do that in Next.js. So we're going to be dealing now with styling in Next.js. So as you can see, everything kind of look dull and boring right now, but we can spice that up in a second. Now we're going to be dealing in this crash course with CSS modules, styled by JSX and Tailwind. Now there's other ways obviously to style your app. Now in this case, you can use CSS in JavaScript, quite powerful in itself, or you can use Bootstrap, etc. But I'm not going to cover this in this course right here. Now let's get started. All right, so let's go to our global CSS right here. So you can obviously create your styles in here, every single thing that you need for your page. But that is not recommended, just my personal opinion. And I think many others would do say the same thing as well. So you can obviously add all your style sheets in here, but they kind of defeat the purpose of being a component-based orientated app. Meaning you can go find anything and you can style everything quickly and you can build out your app very quickly. So if I need to go and style a page, I just go to its module and basically work on it. All right, let me kind of demonstrate our global CSS right here. So as you can see, there's no padding. If I want to add some padding, so let me just add some 1 padding. As you can see, it affects all the different pages. So if I go to all the pages right here, as you can see, it affects them all. Now, let's say I want to style this H1 right here. So I can go down here and put the H1 and let's say we just want to change the color to maybe, let's just use 32, CD 32. So this is just kind of a lime color. So as you can see, it affects that as well on all the different pages. The reason for that is because in our app.js right here, we're making sure we're using the import basically the global style sheet like this. Okay, so that's why it affects all the different pages. But this is not the way I recommend it. The global style sheet is just there basically to reset all the margins, the padding and the margins. So basically, by default, let me just show you. By default, your browser automatically add all different styling and padding to the body by itself, and that kind of influence your CSS. All right, so let me just do this. So then it just kind of resets everything, and you can obviously add the font family and all that kind of stuff in here as well. So what you will normally do is you will import the basically your Google fonts in here and just kind of the default stuff that you want to use. All right, so as you can see, all that kind of stuff. So box sizing for border box, just the plain CSS stuff right here. Now this goes to the next part. So let's quickly see how we can use CSS modules in Next.js. I'm just going to delete this one right here, and we're going to work with the index on this page right here. So if we go to the home page, the index. So I want to basically create a style sheet that is particular to this page right here. So how do I do that? So in order to do that, we make use of modules, CSS modules. So we're just going to create a new file, or you can do it one of two ways. Just click on that and you just basically click this file icon. So in here, the convention is capitalize, right? So index. And now this part is important. If you don't add the module in here, it's not going to work. So you have to add index.module.css like this. So now we got our CSS file open right here. Now this file, obviously, if we haven't linked it up yet, so before we can use it, we need to link it up. But let's quickly do say a couple of gotchas in here. You cannot use your normal tags in here. So if you want to start, like you remember from the global CSS, we reference the tags itself, but you cannot do that in your modules. You can do whatever you want, but if you're going to have some errors, you will know why. So, all right, so you cannot mention that of any tag, so either main tag or anything like that. You have to use a class, all right, so a title or an ID, so title like this. You have to use these in here. So that's just gotchas for you, okay? So let's start off with our first, basically, class right here. So we got a title, all right, and what we want to do with the title is we want to give it the same thing. So I'm just going to give it the color of the 32CD32. All right, so that's basically the title right there. Now the thing is, what we do is, in order to make use of this module, we go to our index.js, this component right here. So we obviously have to bring in that module. So we just want to say import. Now this part is important. This is just a convention. You add styles right here, all right, from. All right, so obviously where you want that module to come from. Now remember, we're inside a folder right here. So in order to go outside the folder, we just add 2 double dots / okay, so then we're out of the folder. Then we just want to go to the styles folder, and inside that we just want to go to that index.module.css. Now I just want to make this right, just put an M right there, and obviously end it off with a semicolon right there. So now we imported that style sheet. So we imported this right here. So let's go to our index again. Now in order to make use of these styles, all right, you would have, this is JSX, remember, it's not HTML. All right, it looks like it. You can treat it as such, but it is not. All right, so if you thought you can add a class in here, please, you cannot do that, because class is a reserved name for JavaScript. All right, so what do we do then? We make use of this word right here, class name. All right, so we can just remove the double quotes from there. Now, in order to work with it, we treat it an object, not that, curly braces. Now the curly braces, then we go to the styles right here. So then we type in this styles right here. As you can see, it highlights it now because we're going to make use of it. And then we just put a dot notation, and then we access their title like that. So basically referencing this class name like this. All right, so let me just give us some room here so that you can easily see that. As you can see, it changes it right here. Okay, so that's how you do it. Now remember, in CSS, you will normally use kebab case. So if we go to, let's say we had another class name called main title, all right, like this. So let me just copy this part right here and move it in here. And I'm just going to comment this one out. So main title right there. So if you want to go and do basically in your class name right here, and you want to access that main title, you will see that you get an error. So title is not defined, okay, because you cannot do that in here. So how do we do that? We just remove the dot, and we're going to put some brackets around it, square brackets like that. Okay, so if I save that, obviously this needs to be with parentheses, just like that. All right, so if you have a big kebab case inside your modules, just make sure that you add it with square brackets. Otherwise, it's not going to read it. You're going to get an error. So as you can see, our homepage it's working right there. So if I go to all the other pages, you can see it doesn't affect any of their styles. The reason for that is, let's open F12, our DevTools right here. So let's quickly go to this title right here. So if we go to the title, you will see with modules, it will give them a unique class name. So as you can see, index.main, all right, and then it adds a unique ID. So it means we can use the same class name for all other different components. It will not affect each other because they will be assigned a unique ID. And that's quite powerful, because if you have different pages, let's say all the titles you want to be the same, obviously it doesn't make sense to go and retype like the dry principle, don't repeat yourself. So that you can do obviously in a global style sheet or in your main style sheet. So if you want the titles to be the same, but what you can do is instead of having to think out a whole different class names, you can actually just use the same class name for the different modules. All right, so that's basically our main title right there. So that's basically how you can deal with modules. Now in this case, let me just close this off. Now let me quickly style the paragraph, and I'm just going to say subtitle, just like as an example. So let me just remove this quickly. All right, so I created a subtitle and the title right there. So in here, what I will do now is I will just put the dot title. All right, so as you can see, it changes right there. And for the paragraph tag, what I will do now is I will just add the class name. And I will just add that right there. Okay, so this will be the styles. Give us some room here so that we can easily see it, because I'm zoomed in a bit so that you guys can actually see what I'm doing. So as you can see, this is wrong. This needs to be styles, and it will just be subtitle right there. All right, so if I do that, you can see it affects it right there. All right, so that's basically how we can add modules. Now, the other way that we can do it, as you can see, I'm doing it right now in the style sheet. So I'm not going to do that for all the pages. I just want you guys to know the basics. Now, the other way is to actually, let's say we go to our components right now. So as you can see, I got a nav right here. What I would have normally done, I will create a folder, and I would have called this one nav. They can be let's just make like this nav, and inside here, I'm just going to say main nav or something. So main.js. All right, and I would copy this over. So let me just do this inside here. Then inside this folder, I would create a module. Basically, for this one, I'm just going to call this one main.module.css. All right, just an example. I'm just doing rough work right now. So inside here, so now I will create for my main nav right here. So this one right here, I would basically create whatever styles I need for this one. And then basically when I import that, I would just say import styles. So that's the convention, okay, from, and then I just go inside this folder, and I'm just going to go to the main.module.css. All right, so basically that's how I would have treated it. Okay, so that's enough about the modules. So I'll just kind of give you guys an examples so that we can learn how to actually add all our different styling. All right, so that's the modules part. So we're going to deal now with style.jsx, and we're going to use it to style our navigation right here. What is it exactly? It allows us to write CSS inside our components right here. Just to give you guys a little better understanding, in HTML, you can either write your CSS in an external style sheet or inline, or you can write it inside your HTML document between two style tags right here. You can write any CSS you want right there. Or if you're coming from a view background, you will have your template, you have a script tags, and then you obviously have your style, and this one is scope right here. And you can write all your CSS in there. It's basically the idea. So how do we write CSS in Next.js inside our components? So what we do is, first thing we need is a style tag. But there's a couple of tweaks we need to do with the style tags right here. The first thing is we have to specify JSX like this, all right? And the next thing is we need to add 2 curly braces and 2 backticks. Now, these backticks are on your keyboard next to the number 1 key, not next to the numlock number 1 key, all right? And then you have that right there. So now you can write any CSS that you want between these 2 tags. So let's target our nav right here. So in the nav, okay? And now you're not restricted. The same way when you write your normal CSS in your external style sheet or wherever you write it, you're not restricted. You can write anything you want in here. So let's target our background color, just to make it stand out a bit so that we can see that it's happening. So as you can see, it changes the color right there. So the next thing that we want to do is let's target our anchor tag. Just remember, in a link right here, what will be rendered is just the anchor tag with an href. Okay, so let's target that one right there. So we can either target like nav A, or we can just target the anchor tag, because there's a reason for this. So the anchor tag right there, we just want to give it some style, right? So if we press save, as you can see, it affects it right there. So I'm just going to change this to a little lighter color. So just triple E, as you can see it right there. So just move this up a bit. Right, so that's basically, if you want to obviously add more, you can do that. But I just want to show you why you can do this right here and will not affect any of the other components that you might have. There's also maybe got a nav or an anchor tag. So if we go to our browser and we press F12 for the development tools, if we click on it, you will see, let me just zoom in. As you can see, it actually gives a unique ID for that component. So whatever happens to this component, so styling wise, it will not affect any other components with the same name. So the nav right there as well. So let's say we want this anchor tag to have the same styling. Obviously, you're not going to do it in this component, but I just wanted to show it as an example. Now, let's say this anchor tag, you want all anchor tags in your application to have this right here. So how do we do that? Right, so I'm just quickly going to create an external link. Just remember, internal link, we're going to use the link right there. But external ones, we just use the normal anchor tag, and I'm just going to say this one is going to go to Google link like this. And if I press save, as you can see, the color is like this. It doesn't affect it. Okay, so let's quickly go there. In order to affect it globally, all we have to do is we have to change this part right here. Just next to the JSX, we just add global like this. Now, if I press save that, nothing happens. But if I refresh, you will see it affects that link right there as well. So now this styling is affecting the whole application and not just the component by just adding this global tag right there. But that's not what I want to do. So I just wanted to show you that's how you can do it. So let me just remove this, and I just want to style this component. Another thing that makes it quite nice with JSX, you can add some dynamism to your application. So how do we do that? Now, let's say this nav bar right here, as you can see, it's got this gray color. Now, if we want to pass in a prop, let's say if the nav is, but for instance, in a dashboard or the main, we want the background color to change accordingly. Now, this is just a simple example, but let's go to our layout right here. So this is our nav bar right here, and I just want to pass in a type, and we want to say the type must be main. Okay, and save that. Inside our component right here, we're going to receive it as props, just like this. And now inside our style right there, we can check for that. So let's quickly check for that prop. Now what we do is we add a $ and some curly braces, and then we're just going to go to the props, and we're just going to check the type and see if that is equal to main, then give us a color. So if that is main, just give us just make it something ridiculous. So let's do the black as well, the dark gray actually. I'm just going to move it down a bit so that you guys can easily see it. So as you can see, the prop type's main. We're going to check if it's main. We're going to make it that dark gray, as you can see right there. If it's not, just make it a greenish color. So let's quickly change this to something else, just anything, just like that. As you can see, it turns to the green color. So that's how we can add a dynamic coloring or anything that you want inside your style, your JSX. Quite powerful. But here is a little bit of a nugget of knowledge for you. If you have something inside your style JSX that is dynamic, you need to just remove it from your style JSX and create another style JSX. Let me just actually copy this down like this, and I'm just going to remove this because this part is static. So this part is static. It doesn't change. It kind of stays the same, but this part is dependent on the props. So what will happen now is whenever the prop change, only this part will be recomputed right there. Okay, so if you have something that is dynamic, keep it separate from the static, just like this. It's not recommended, but it's just a good practice. So basically, when the prop change, only the dynamic parts will be recomputed. Right, so the next thing is now we learned how to basically localize it for the component itself or how to add it globally. Now, other part that you can do is you can create an external JSX style sheet. Right, in order to do that, we go to our styles right here, and we're going to create a new file for our JSX, and this one we're just going to call global.css. So what I want to do, not actually CSS, this needs to be JavaScript. Right, so what I want to do is all the CSS for the default styling, I just wanted to put it inside this file just as an example so that we can see the effect right there. Okay, so now inside here, what we do is we say import, okay, CSS, and we can just say from styled, I think style JSX /CSS. right there. Okay, just to kind of give you an idea where this is coming from. So in your node modules, when you do your installation, if we go down to style.jsx, inside here, you will see it right there, and we're going to look for that CSS. Okay, awesome stuff. Now, the next thing is we're going to create an export default. And then we're just going to set CSS to global. And then we're just going to add our two backticks. Okay, and then we can write any CSS we want in here. And I just want to use all the CSS basically for the global one. And then I'm just going to paste it in here. Just an example, because I don't want to type in too much. Right, so that's just now our component for our JSX is all done. Now let me just go to our app CSS right here. So pages under app CSS, just comment this one out. If we save that, as you can see, the default styling is being removed right there. So the next thing is under our layout, let's import this global basically JSX file. So let's go to components under layout. Let's import that. So import global. Okay, basically it's going to import it now automatically from styles, just like that. So import global, I'm just going to add some styles here. So add global styles from that. Now, the only thing we have to do now is we obviously have to create our style tags. So let's just do that. So our style tags with two curly braces and put in our global styles in there. But just don't forget this part right there. Just add your JSX right there. So if we save that, we need to see the same effect like this. So as you can see, now it affects the page because we bring it in from the global style sheet that we created for JSX. Awesome stuff. So that is the convention. So now we're going to install Tailwind CSS. So if you go to the website of tailwindcss.com, I'll leave a link for you guys in the description. So then you're going to click on Docs right here, and then you're going to look for Getting Started and then Installation. So click on Installation. Under Installation, we'll see Tailwind CLI using Post CSS Framework Guides, and the one that we want to click on is Framework Guides right here. So as you can see, there's a bunch of different frameworks right here, and the one that we're looking for is the one that we're working in, NEXT.js. So click on NEXT.js, and I'm currently using version 3.0.23, so yours might be a little bit different. So obviously, just consult the documentation. So we already created the first part right here. We created our project, so let's install Tailwind CSS. Right, so let's start off with the first command right here. So open up your terminal, this one. Just open up terminal. So as you can see, I got mine open right here. Just give us some room there. So if we copy this, paste it in here, and press enter. So that's installing. Right, so that's finished. So let me just quickly show you. In our package.json, it will create a couple of dependencies. So as you can see, what it will do is it will add Post CSS and Tailwind CSS as a def dependency in our package.json. Right, so the next thing that we have to do now is just open up your terminal again, and then we just want to create our Tailwind config file. So let's just click on this, so config, and then we just press enter. So as you can see, it will create a Tailwind config file right here. So as you can see there, right there, and it will create a Post CSS config file as well. So the one that we're going to focus on is this one right here. So just the Tailwind config file. So minimize your terminal. Right, so the easiest thing to do, instead of just copying this part right here and paste it in there, in case you make any mistakes, just copy everything in there and paste it in here, just like that. Right, so all this does is just basically checking under our pages folder. It will check for JavaScript type files, it will check for TypeScript, and it look for JSX types and for TypeScript JSX. All right, so that is basically what this is. So if you save that, now if you're using, in this case, we got a global CSS file right here, then you just bring in this right here, a Tailwind like this, okay? Because now our styles is going to be part, if we go to our actual.js, you'll see right here, our global CSS. So if we bring that in there in our global CSS right here, so Tailwind is now available. Now, the next thing we do is we're just saying npm run dev. So let me just create another terminal. I'm just going to say npm run dev for local server to spin up. Okay, so let me just click on this and actually open it up right there. Right, so as you can see, we bring in our global CSS right here. So if we go to our index.js under class name, so we don't need any more of the style sheets. Let me just do this. So obviously we're going to get an error. Right, so there's no class names currently. So what I want to do is just want to use Tailwind classes. So I can say font bold, and I can just give it a color. So text blue of, let's say, 400. And just as you can see, it changes immediately because now we're using Tailwind. Right, so now let's say you don't even want a global CSS file right here. Let me just get some style. Now, what you can do is, let's say you don't have this file right here. So what you can do in your app right here. So let's say we comment our global CSS out. As you can see, it affects it right there. So what we can do now is we can just say import All right, and then we can just say Tailwind CSS / Tailwind CSS. If I do that, as you can see, it affects the page immediately. So that's one way. So if you don't want to basically work with a global CSS, let's say you just want to delete your style file, just this folder, all of it immediately, and you don't need it, you can just bring it in like this. But other way you can do it as well is you can basically bring it in via the global style sheet. Okay, that's totally up to you. So as you can see, if we go to the index right here, obviously added a couple of stylings. So I add a section with some padding, and I can even just give it a background of gray and say 400. So as you can see, it affects it immediately. All right. So that's two ways that you can do it. Either directly, so in your C with a Tailwind like this, after you install it, obviously, or you can bring it via the global CSS file. All right. So that's how you can install it, and you can do your normal Tailwind stuff. So now we're going to deal with our head component in Next.js. Now, this component is responsible for our titles, meta tags, and much more. Title is basically the title in the browser right there, and meta tags in terms of keywords, descriptions, Facebook-related meta tags like the OG title, OG description, and Twitter-related for the card, etc. Now, how do we add that in Next.js? So if we go to our app right now, if I press F12 and we go to the head section, you will see the only meta tags that's relevant for us right now is the viewport and the UTF-8. And as you can see, the title is empty. And all the other ones are Next.js related. So how do we add that in Next.js? So if we go to our app layout, so let's quickly go in here under pages.app.js, this one right here. Just make sure everything is in the one parent element. In this case, it's a React fragment right there. So in order to bring in our head component, we just import it quickly. So import head. So from next add, just like that. In order to make use of it, we just bring in our head component just like that. So just type in head. Now we can do anything we want. So in here, we can add the title, meta description. In this case, let's add the title first. We want to set a default title for every page. And this one is just, we're just going to say course. So if I save that, you will see every single page have their title now. And let's add a default meta description. So if we add that, all right, so now we've got a default of meta name for the description. You can obviously add more, but I just want to keep it as simple as possible for now. So the name for the description and the content is default. So if I go to our app right now, let's go to the home page. And in here, we can see that we have our default description. So let's give it some room. Right, so as you can see, we got our description, content is default, and we have our title right there. So that's basically now for our app, we created a default title and we created a default description for the meta. So you can obviously add more if you want to. Now, the thing is, now let's say you want to create a title that's unique to our homepage. So we can do that. So let's quickly go to our homepage right here. So all we have to do is we have to obviously bring in our head component. So head. Okay. Right. Once we bring in our component, we can use it. So let's quickly create that. So for the title that we want to do is we want to create the course and we just want to say home. So if I save that, as you can see, it updates it. So if I press F12, and if I go to our head section right there, you can see it overrides the default ones that we have. So remember the default that we have is just course. So if I change it right here, it overrides it. Okay, so just to kind of give you another example. So let's say we want to change the default description. So let's just copy this part right here and let's change the default description to home. So let's do that. So if I save that, as you can see, it updates it and changes it. So whatever you basically any head sections that you add inside your components itself that's not in the default one for my app, it will override them. But by default, you can set a default description, title, meta tag so that every page have the same ones. So as you can see, if I go to the different ones, it still have the same default ones that we set. All right. So what we can do now is we can actually copy this part and add them for the different pages. In this case, I just want to do it for our about page. Because all I want to do in here is I just want to change the title. So I'm just going to remove the description. And I just want to set the title in here. So title about. And obviously we have to make sure we import this part. So let's go and import our head. So import our head component. So head from next / head. All right. So let me just save that. And as you can see, if you go to the about, you can see it updates accordingly. All right, so that's basically how you can add this. And obviously, you guys know that meta tags is very good for SEO purposes, so that you can add them in there. Now, another thing that you have is, now let's say you can have an articles. In this case, we want to add some dynamic meta tags. So in this case, let's go and add our head section. And we want to add the title. But now let's say we receive the title as a prop in our dynamic page. So we can just do that. And let's put in our title right there. So we receive it as a prop. And all we have to do now is we can just add it in here like this. And obviously we need to make sure we import this. So let me just import the head component. And I just want to add something at the back so we know that this is coming from this page. I will just say dynamic. Just like that, title dynamic. Right, so if we go to the page of articles, but remember we haven't passed any prop yet, we haven't got to that part, by just making this as an example. So if we go to / maybe 2, press enter, as you can see, it updates accordingly. So the dynamic, so if we pass in a prop for the title, you will see the title will be in there as well. All right, so that's an end of this episode with regards to our head component in Next.js. So now we're going to deal with the image component in Next.js. Quite a powerful component, and it makes working with images quite a breeze in Next.js. So let's go to our public folder. I got an image here called workstation.jpg. So as you can see, if you look at the bottom right here, you will see the size is 5760 by 3840, and the file size is 5.63 megabytes. So you will know if you use this image in your application, you will run into some performance issues. So how do we deal with images like this, or any image in Next.js? Let's go to our index file. So in our index file right here, in order to, normally we would do is we will use an image tag like this. Now, how do we actually access any image inside our public folder? All we have to do is we just have to specify / and then obviously the name of the image. Right, so as you can see, we got a / workstation. So if I save that, you will see we got our image right there. Now, in Next.js, we don't use the image tag like this. What we have is we got a special component to do that. So you bring in import image from next / image, and then you change your image tag to image like this. So if I save that, we're going to get an error because there's a couple of things that we need as well. So if I save that, as you can see, for any image, we need the source, all right, with the source and the alt, okay, obviously, and then we need a width and a height. With regards to the width and height, it can be any numeric value. So in this case, we can make it 250 by 100, just like that. Or you can make it in pixels, or you can use percentage, like this, or you can use standard CSS properties. So in this case, we can say view width, or the other one will be view height. You can use any of those. So in my case, I'm just going to leave it as 250, and that if I save that, you can see it saves it right there accordingly. Another thing that we can do is, like it said, if we leave out the width and the heights, we can put a layout property. Now layout, we can set it to full. So if I press save, it will actually fill the whole screen with that. Now that's not what we're looking for, but I just wanted to show you that's what you can do as well. So let's quickly add our width and height back. All right, so the moment we put the image tag right here, you guys remember that we had a file size of 5.63 megabytes. So if I go to my developer tools right now, and if I refresh the page, you will see the file size of our image is being reduced to only 12.44 kilobytes, speeding up the image as well. So optimizing it for loading, and it's got a file type. It changed from a JPEG to a correct optimized version, which is WEP. As you can see, WebP right there. What you can see, it is cached right there. So let's quickly go to our next folder right here. So inside our next folder, our images, under images, you will see that we got the image right there, right? So there are additional attributes that we can add to our image right here. So we obviously have discussed the width and height. Another one that we have is called quality. By default, the quality is set to 75. So if we add quality in here, by default, it's set to 75. So you don't see this default right there. So you can set it to whatever quality you want. Obviously, 1 being the lowest. So if I save this, you will see the image kind of reduce in quality very soon. And 100, as you can see it, not very nice. But if I go to F12 again and refresh the page, you will see the image size even got lower to 3.43 kilobytes. So by default, it is set to 75. So obviously you can set it to 100 if you want to increase the quality. So if I refresh this, you will see it's now 63.04 kilobytes. Still very much smaller than the 5.63 megabytes. All right, so that's one of the properties. The other one that I've just showed you guys right now is called layout. Now in layout, there's a couple of attributes that we can assign. The first property in here is called fill. So that will obviously fill the container. It will basically grow in the X and the Y axis to fill the container itself. The other one is fixed. Now fixed, basically, it will keep the width and the height. So as you can see, it's set to 250 by 120. It will stay that way. Doesn't matter the size of the screen. It's fixed. The other one is responsive. So that is kind of self-explanatory. What that will do is we'll just scale to the width of the container accordingly. So if it's on a mobile phone and all that kind of stuff. And the next one that we have, by default, the layout is set to intrinsic. So if we remove this right here, by default, it will be intrinsic. All right, so let's say we have the fill or the responsive layout property right here. What we can do, just close this. What we can do, let me just set the quality to 75. If I set it to 75 and I save that, it will be better if I remove it because it will actually just save it as such. All right. The next thing that we can do, let's say we set the layout property to fill or responsive. What we can do now is we can deal with CSS property called object fit. Now, object fit, if you guys remember, it will have a contain, or you can set the image to cover, or you can set it to fill, or you can set it to scale down. All right. That's the kind of once you add in there, so you don't need any other CSS properties. And this is for responsive or fill. So let me just quickly do this one to set it to contain. And what I will do is I will actually just make this 100 view widths, and I'll set the height to 100%. If I do that, you'll see it kind of contains the image inside the container. Right? If I set it to cover, just watch the image. As you can see, it fills the whole container with the image, so it covers the image. The other one that we have is obviously fill. So if I do fill, as you can see, it fills the space. Right? So that's how you can do it. Another one that we have in here is called object position. Now this one, you can set it if you want to put it in the center. Let me just put this as contain. All right, because you will easily see it. So if I want to do that, I can set it to the right top. So if I save that, as you can see, it moves up right there. Okay, so that's a couple of extra things that you can add to your image. Now, basically the benefit of it is it optimizes automatically the image to the right sizes, and you can have a lot of properties that you can add in. All right. Now, the other thing is all images in Next.js using the image component, it means all images will be lazy loaded. So any image, let's say we got this website right here and we have images that's not in the view of the screen right here, you can obviously, it will not load because it's lazy loaded. It will only load the images that's needed for the screen right there. You can obviously change that behavior, but that's a little bit more for advanced users. So as you can see, it's quite a powerful component. It will give you a lot of freedom, and you don't need to worry about image optimization. And another way to actually get the images inside your component right here is you can import the image. So all we have to do in here is we can import, and I'm just going to say work image from, and then we can just say, I'll go to the public folder. Okay, so inside the public folder, and then we can just go to the workstation.jpg. Just like that. So we got our image right there. And so now we can just render the image in here. So I can just bring in that work image. So if I save that and I refresh the page, as you can see, it renders quite nicely. So if I press the F12 and I refresh this again, so as you can see, it's cached, and you can see the size of the file is 12.44 kilobytes. So we get to the part of the series where we'll talk about data, getting data and displaying the data. But before I do that, we need to talk about pre-rendering in Next.js, because Next.js is actually solving a problem that you would have if you had the React app. So let me show you. Right, so now I got to react on localhost 3001 because I'm using localhost 3000 for my Next.js app. So let's quickly inspect this. So if we go to inspect, you'll see right here, just remember this part right here, we got a div, and inside the div, we got all the HTML needed for this page right here. Okay, so as you can see, the header with the images and all that kind of stuff. But here comes the problem. If we right click on here and we go to view page source right there, so this is the initial load of the page with a div with the ID of root and nothing in there. So no HTML, nothing. So basically any search engine is going to go to your page. This is what they will see. I know Google is tackling the issue, but I just wanted to show you for the other search engines, this might be an issue. Now Next.js is solving this problem by pre-rendering all the HTML needed for that page with its data between its div tags. Let me show you. All right, so I got my localhost 3000 for the app that we've been busy with, right, to learn. So if I press F12 and I go right here, you will see now instead of the div with the ID of root, we have a div with the ID of next. So if I click on any of them right there, you can see our nav and all the HTML needed for our page right here. Now let's say we go to this page source. So as you can see, it pre-renders all the HTML that's needed. So here is the div with the ID of next. We got our navigation in here as well. We got the section right here with its footer, all the HTML. Now, let's say you have data as well, which we're going to get to. It will pre-render that as well. So as you can see, it actually improves the performance. And now let's say you have a blog or any other website with pages that you want to be indexed by the search engines. This will be very, very handy. Now, the other thing as well is it will reduce the waiting time for your application. Now, let's say a user is going to any of the pages, it will actually reduce the waiting times because it pre-renders most of the HTML, actually all the HTML that's needed for that page. So let me just give you a quick summary. Now, Next.js will pre-render every page in the application. So if we go to our homepage, about articles and services, it will pre-render all of these pages with its HTML and the data needed for that page. So this will improve performance and reduce the waiting time for your users. All right, so that's it. So because going forward, we will talk about static generation. So this will kind of make sense of when we kind of have to explain to you pre-rendering. In a previous episode, we covered pre-rendering. Now, the two types of pre-rendering that we want to cover in this course is static generation and the other one, server-side rendering. Now, with server-side rendering, all it means is HTML is generated on every request. Now, static generation, on the other hand, is it basically generates all the HTML at build time, and that HTML will basically be used for every request. All right, so if you run the build command, if you open up your terminal and just create a new one, so if you run npm run build, so this will basically run an optimized version of your app right there for production. Now that part basically generates the HTML and that will be served for every request. Now server-side rendering, on the other hand, is we use it when you have data that's continually changing. Now let's say you have a financial website where indicators, markets, whatever, the data is continuously changing every minute or every couple of seconds. Now server-side rendering will be useful for that, since it will need to basically every request it updates the page. Okay, so what we're going to deal with now is static generation. So as you can see, we've got articles right here, and what we want to do is we want to hit an endpoint API and get all the articles and display those articles right there. But what we want to do is we want to check the page source to check if we actually so in the initial load, we actually load the data as well. Right, so API that we're going to use is called JSON placeholder, a free fake API for testing and prototyping. So what we want to do is we go down. I'll leave a link for you guys in the description. So they got a couple of endpoints. 6 common resources is the post, common albums, comments, albums, photos, to-dos, and users. The one that we want to focus on is the post right here. So if I click on it, as you can see, we get different kinds of posts, title and body, and the user IDs right there. I'll leave a link for you guys in the description. So let's build this out. Right, so I'm just going to copy that URL. Right. All right, so let's go to that page right here, the articles page. So under articles, we will know the index page is basically the one that we're viewing right here. So let's quickly go in there. So how do we get all the data from an API? So there is a method. So we're going to call export async getStaticProps. All right, so this is a method in Next.js called getStaticProps. All right, so just make export async function getStaticProps. Now this part right here can only be done inside your pages. It cannot be basically used in any of the other components. It can only be done in your pages to get data, because getStaticProps only runs on the server side. For the guys from a Laravel background, just think of this as a public function that we're getting in Laravel, and then we're going to get the post, and then we just want to get all the posts right here. So I'm going to leave this quickly for reference because there's a couple of things I want to mention. Now in here, we need to do a couple of things. The first thing is we want to basically hit this API of that. Right, so let's go and get the data. So we're just going to create a constant, and in this one, we're just going to say a response. All right, and then we're going to wait, and then we're going to say fetch. All right, so then we're going to fetch basically at that domain right here. So I'm obviously leave a link for you guys in the description. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it in here. All right. Now think of this part right here as this part. So we're getting all the data. All right. The next thing is we're going to set that data to a variable. All right, this variable right here. So it's this one right here. So we're going to set that data. So you can call it articles or whatever. So in this case, I'm just going to set it to data, and I'm going to equal that to the response that we get right there. And we just want to save it in JSON format like this. All right, so that's basically what we have done right now. This part right here is we're getting all the posts. And this part right here is we're setting this post to that response data. Just like this right now. All right, but we haven't included this data inside the view. All right, so how do we do that? So in Next.js, we have to return. All right, so if you guys remember in here, what we do is we return a view. All right, so let me just do this. All right, so then we return a view, and then we put the obviously the view, and then this. But so obviously this don't work in here, but I just want to give you guys an example. All right, so remember this part right here is not part of our component. I'm just using it as an example because my community is Laravel, so I just wanted to explain it to them. All right, so what we do now is we return, all right, an object. Now inside this object, so basically think of it now, we're creating a return. All right, so this is the return right here. So in here, we return a props. Okay, so we're setting it as this right part right here. So we're working on the compact right there. So now the compact, and what do we set the props to? Now the props, basically, this can be any key value pairs. So I just need to make that as colon right there. So props to an object. Now this can be anything. So in this case, I want to create, this is the name that we want to use inside there. Okay, so what do we want to set this to? So if you call this something else, right? Something, all right? We want to set this something to the data right there. Okay, so this is what we call it, and this what we call right here is what we set that to that data. Okay, so we just want to set it to that data right there. Okay, so in this case, I want to be consistent with what I receive. So in this case, I'm going to receive articles right there. All right, so now this articles we're going to use inside our articles right there. So we can just bring in that articles like this. All right, so now this articles, because of this right here, it's available inside our view right there. Okay, so that's all it is. So let me just delete this part right here. Now remember, Next.js is component based, so everything works with components. Now as you can see, I have many articles, so it means I need to create a component for a single article. So let's do that. So let's open up. So inside our components right here, we're just going to create a new file called article.js. All right, so let's return this. So just going to create one quickly. So I'm just going to create the arrow function article right here. So in here, I'm going to receive a prop for a single article like this, and then we're just going to create in here an h1 and a paragraph. All right, so how do we access this article right here? So all we basically do is we add the article like this with a dot notation, and then we want to say what property do we want to access. Okay, so in this case, remember with blade syntax, what we have done, we will have done that, double bracket this side, double there, and then we would render it basically. But for us right here, all we do is just single brackets like this, and then article, and then a dot notation for the title. And we're going to do the same for the paragraph. So just like this, and then article dot body. All right, but just remember we need to receive this article. All right, but we're going to pass it through in a second. All right, and I just want to add some classes in here. Right. Now we need to bring in this article because this article is part of our components right there. So inside our index right here, we need to make use of that article. So I'm going to remove this, all right, and I'm going to bring in that article. So let's do that. So import article. So as you can see, I'm bringing it in from our components article right there. But now what we want to do is we want to, in Laravel, we would have done add for each. All right, we would have done a loop like that. But in JavaScript, what we do is we need to call on the map method. Right, so two curly braces like this. And then what we do is articles, the articles right there. So we want to loop over that. So we call a dot map like this. And then we just want to create two parentheses. And inside this parentheses, we want what we want to call it. We want to call this an article. And then in there, we just want to create an arrow function like this. Then inside this, we want to return. All right. What do we want to return? We want to return basically that article that we just, this component right here. So let's quickly do that. So we're just going to bring that article in. But just remember, we're expecting this article now because we're mapping over this articles. What we're expecting an article. So what we want to do is we want to pass this article because we're going to receive it as a prop, this article. So let me copy it and paste it in here so you guys can see. So article, and I want to set that basically to this article right here. Okay, just like this. So if you name this art, all right, then just make sure that you put this as art as well. Totally up to you, because where this is just coming from, this is the name that we want to give everything that we map over. All right, so article, then passing the article. Let me just create a div for everyone as well. And then I just want to bring this in there, just like that. Okay. This part right here, I forgot to add a weight right there. So if I save that and I refresh this right here, so as you can see, we got all our articles right here. So we got articles right there with the title and everything in between right here. Okay, awesome stuff. Now the thing that I want to show you is if I go to right click right here and I go to page source right here. So as you can see, it actually pre-renders that via static generation, okay, the HTML with the data beforehand. And this wouldn't have happened if you had the React app, because all the data would be done client-side via JavaScript and hydrate basically our app page right here. Okay, so awesome stuff. So that is basically static generation. So as you can see, everything done right here. So in the previous episode, we dealt with static site generation and we fetched the data using getStaticProps right here. And then we got the data and we display the data right here. Now, what we want to do is we want to display that same data using server-side rendering. So how do we do that? There's not much that we have to change in here. Everything else stays the same. All right. And all we have to do is we change this part to getServer. All right, so we just say getServerSideProps. All right, so as you can see, right now we got the articles and the data right here. Now, let's say, I just want to mention this as well to anyone that's new right here. So if you've got the data right here, as you can see, I'm referencing the article. I'm setting this articles to their data. But if I mention this as articles like this, all right, I don't have to reference it like this. I can just leave it as articles right there. And as you can see, it basically remains right there. So now we're getting the data instead of basically getting it statically, compiling it once. So in static site generation, what happens is it compile all the HTML with the data once, and it reuse that same, basically that same data with every request. With server-side rendering, it gives us new HTML with every request. All right, so that's the difference between the two. All right, so but as you can see, all we have to do is change this part right here. But now I may want to mention this. So you don't have to choose between the one or the other. It's NEXT.js is basically a hybrid framework. It means that in some parts of your application, you might want to use static site generation or server-side rendering. Then you can choose, like let's say our articles page, this data change maybe once a month or once every couple of days. Then static generation will make sense, but I will show you a solution in the next episode for something like that. The other one is services. Now, let's say this page right here have financial indicators that change continuously. Every couple of seconds it changes, or maybe every couple of milliseconds this change. Then we can use server-side rendering for that because their data is continually new. Then it means in services, we can use server-side, basically get the data using getting server-side-props. In our articles right here, we can basically get the data using getting statics props like this. All right, that's totally up to you, but you always have to choose what's relevant for your application. But now there's another problem. So if you basically, let's say in our services, we're getting the data using getServerSideProps right here. Now, just remember, the server have to work a little bit more. So that means if you're hosting your server with a company that obviously going to charge you for how much you use the service, obviously that will make sense because it puts more load on their servers. It will mean for this part right here, you will incur a higher cost. But with static generation, you're not going to have that much of a problem because most of your work is cached, and that cache is basically served to the client. And I just want to say thank you guys for supporting the channel, watching our videos. Really appreciate you. And I just want to give a shout out to Aiden and for the membership. Really appreciate you as well. Thank you, sir. All right, what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to deal with the hybrid between getServerSideProps and getStaticProps. Just remember, just the difference between the two. Getting static generation, what happens is it compiled the HTML once with the data, and it used that same HTML with every subsequent request, all right? And server-side rendering, on the other hand, every request gets new HTML, all right? Now, how do we get the hybrid between the two? It's called Incremental Static Regeneration. So what that does is we still use the static props, all right? So getStaticProps, we still use this property, all right? But what we do is we add another property. When we return the data, remember the articles right here that we return, that we receive, and we map over right here. This data right here, just underneath our props, what we do is we add revalidate property like this. And now next to it, we add the time limit in seconds. So every 20 seconds right here. So we add that in there. So every 20 seconds now. So what will happen now is instead of our whole site to be rebuilt again, it will only update this page right here every 20 seconds with the right data right here. All right, so what will happen is, let's say someone comes to our articles right here. So they look at the page, and if they come here again, if it's 10 seconds, they will be served with the same data. So if they come in 21 seconds or 20 seconds, they will get the new data being displayed to them like that. So what we want to do in this episode, we want to make the articles clickable so that we can go to the individual articles. So right now, we go to the URL /article/5, we will get our dynamic page right here. So as you can see, dynamic right there. So what we want to do is we want to make all of this clickable, then access that single article right there. For anyone that's new, we're working with a fake API called jsonplaceholder.topico.com/post. I'll leave a link for you in the description. So if we click on this one right here, you'll see we get 100 posts right here. So all the posts. Now what we want to do now for dynamic pages, we want to go to that post and basically access whatever value we want. So in this case, 6 or 7 or 5. So if we hit that, we can access that URL for that post. Okay, so let's do that. So the first part is we must make this clickable. So all right, so if we go to our single article, so if we click on that, we get to a single article. We want to make it a link. So let's quickly bring in our link component in Next.js. The next thing is we create an anchor tag. All right, so an anchor tag right there. And then we just cut this out and paste it in there. All right, so we're not done yet. We need to add our href in here as well. So href, let's just do that, href. And our href is going to equal to two curly braces, backticks, and then we're just going to access the articles URL /, and then we're just going to add the dynamic ID at the back right there. So article.id. Okay, but obviously we haven't bring it in yet, so let's import it at the top. Right, so we got our link imported right there. So if we click on this, you can see we access that article 1. So if we click this, article 3. Now this dynamic page, so we can close this now. So this dynamic page is this page right there. So as you can see, dynamic. So I'm just going to add some stuff at the back. So if I save that, is this page that we're going to. All right, now for dynamic pages, in order to get basically the single article from that URL, from this URL right there, there's two things we need. We need getStaticProps and getStaticPaths. Okay. All right, so the first one, getStaticProps, and the other one, getStaticPaths. I will explain this in a second. So the first one that we need in here is we need to access this URL and make the last part dynamic. So whatever value we're passing in here, we access that and basically hit that URL. Right, so the first part is I'm just going to copy everything in here from our index, so that response as well. So instead of a string right here, I'm just going to make it backticks. Okay, and then I'm just going to go to /, put the $, and then I add params.id. Now this parameter is, we're going to access it from here, so we just pass it in here. So the params like this, and then we put it in like this. All right, so that's the only change we have to make right there. Make this, instead of just a string, basically add two backticks next to your number 1 key on your keyboard, and the other one is we access their response with the data like this. All right, now after this, what we do is we need to obviously return this article. This is a single article, not articles. All right, so let's return, and then we're just going to say articles. Right, so return props and the article. So if you had this as data, all right, so the article, then we can just set it as data like this. All right, so now we got access to it right here. So we're going to bring in that article, and then we're just going to add it. All right, so now we got it all done. So we bring in our articles with its title, everything inside there, but we're not finished yet. Now, the reason why it's needed this, because this is the dynamic values that it needs to return. All right, so Next.js needs to know. So if we go to /5, it needs to get it, or in /6, it needs to know all the pages, because remember, it needs to pre-compile our pages. All right, and then serve those pages right there. Okay, so it needs to know the different paths to generate that data. But now we're getting 100 basically posts from our API right here. So what I want to do is I want to copy this part right here to let Next.js know how many pages we're going to need. So in this case, we're going to need 100. So on there, what we want to do is we need to create the data. I'm just going to set that to await, and then the response.json like this. Now we're not finished yet. Now what we need to do is, let me just give you an example. For a getStaticProps, we need to return basically the different paths. Okay, so we need to return an object where the paths is an array. All right, and then inside here we need to create the different parameters. Now the parameters is going to be an object and then a param. Okay, and then we're going to add another object. In this case, it must be the ID, because we're referencing the ID like this. So this was article ID, and you make this article ID like that. Okay, but since we made it ID, I'm just going to reference it ID. And then this part is important. This needs to be a string. So in this case, we need 100 of those. So we need to put 1. Okay, and then we're just going to put a comma right here, and then we need to create 100 of these right here. Okay, I'm just making a joke, but that's basically the idea. You need to create 100 of these paths for Next.js to know. So if you put 1, 2, and let me just make it 3, and then obviously 100. So it needs to know all those paths. All right, but there's an easier way to do this, but I want to show you, you need to create objects with the paths like this. Okay, for Next.js to know all the different paths. And the ones that's not included, it will return a 404 for that. All right, so let's quickly do that easier for us. Since we get all the data right here, now it's easier for us to loop over those and actually create paths from that. So let's start over the first one. This is a paths. And what I want to do is I want to access this data right here, and I want to map over it. So basically create a loop. And then for each article, okay, I want to create an arrow function. And then in there, I'm just going to create an object. All right, and then we're just going to create the params. Right, so we just do a params. And then we're just going to create another one, and in this case we add the ID, and the ID is going to equal to the article dot ID, and we just want to set that to string. Okay, so to a string method in JavaScript. So what that will do is whatever ID we get right here, we will turn that to an object, basically to a string. All right, which brings us to another part right here in our getStaticProps. It's called fallback. All right, now a fallback can have three different values. The first one, and let me just add a comma right there. So the first one, it can be false, okay, or it can be true, or it can be a string called blocking. All right, I'm just quickly going to explain it because this is just a crash course, but if you want to read more about it, you can go and do that in a docs. So let's start off with the first one. Now, the first one is now right here. So if it doesn't find a path for that page, it will return a 4 of 4. If it's set to true, it will not return a 4 of 4. It will return a fallback page. All right, letting us know, like, listen, let's say we go to article number, let's say in this case, we go to 101. That page is not there. Okay, so in that case, what it will do is it will basically serve, in most cases, a loading. Let's say some pages, if you access them, it's got like a loading icon. You can do that. That's basically the fallback page, and then it serves it. Now, when you say is blocking, so a string of blocking, basically it blocks the fallback, but what it does is it basically serves the page that the client actually requested. Right? But there is a lot to explain about it, so I'm not going to deal with it in this course, but if you want to go and read more about it, you can. But there is use cases for it, but you can, by default, we're just going to leave it as false. Now, this is a have to include, so by default, we're just going to leave that as false. Right, so if we click on any article right there, okay, it doesn't appear. Oh, I forgot this part right there. This just needs to be between two curly braces like that. So as you can see, we got all our art. All right, so we got article number 1. So let's go to any other one. Let's access this one. As you can see, it got the article right there. Okay, so that's how easy it is to do this. So now we're going to deal with environment variables in Next.js, how to create them and how to access them. Now, in order to do that, all we have to do is we create a new file and we're going to call this one .env.local. That's it. All right. So as you can see, it will be get ignored. So meaning anything or secrets or passwords, anything in this file will not be exposed to the public. All right. So let's quickly close this off. In order to create a variable, all we need is to a key and a value pair. All right. And so now we got our DB for our database, and that's the cause, and the user is root, and the password is password. Now, how do we access these variables in Next.js? But I just want to mention before we do that, if you created your file after you start up the server, all right? Right, so if we start up our server, npm run dev like this, just look at this at the bottom right here, you will see basically we get the server. It started up at that server right there. So if we click on anything, as you can see, all good. Now, the thing is, if you create the environment variable, you can see it doesn't pull in that file. All right, let's quickly create it and run the server again. All right, so as you can see, now Next.js will basically pull in our environment local file right here. Okay, so awesome stuff. So then we can access it. Okay, just remember, if you created the file before you actually run this, you will not be able to, but just restart the server and then you can work with it. All right, now in order to access these variables, all we have to do, let's go to our articles right here. So pages, articles, and the index. All right, so in here, let's quickly create a variable called database. And in order to access this right here, this variable database, I'm just going to access this one. In order to access it, all we have to do is we say process.env. All right, and then we add the dot notation for the name of the variable. Now in this case, this will be db_database. Right, so now we access it. But now the thing that I want to show you is whatever database variables that we put right here will remain a secret. So it cannot be exposed to the front end like this, to the client side in the browser. All right, so let's quickly console log that database. All right, so I console log the database. All right, so if we go in here and we press F12 and we refresh this, as you can see, there's nothing in there. But this will only run in the Node.js environment. So if we open up our terminal right here, you will see there it is right there, that console log. It will only run in the local environment, in the Node.js environment. Okay. Now the thing is, let's try to access that in our articles right here. So let's quickly see if we can expose it in the browser. So let's quickly add. Right. So I'm doing the same thing. So if I refresh this, you will see there's nothing being shown right there, just to protect you, just in case you by accident basically expose it. But let's say you want to expose certain variables to the front end. How do you do that in the client? How do we do that? All we have to do is we create a new variable, or we can create the same one. Let's quickly, all we have to do is we have to give it a prefix of next public underscore, and then the name of the variable. Now in this case, let's say database. Okay, and then I'm going to equal that to course again. All right. Now, if you make any changes to your environment, local file right here, .env.local, you have to restart the server. Otherwise, the changes that will not be used. All right. So let's quickly restart the server. So npm run dev, compile it, bring in our local file right there. Okay. So let's go to our articles right here. Let's refresh this. All right. So let's go in our index right here. So right now, h1 right here. So we need to bring in this variable. Okay, I'm just going to copy that part, and I'm just going to say, do the same thing. I'm just going to say process.env dot and the name of the variable. Now, this one is going to be next underscore public. So if I save that, as you can see, it brings it in right there. Okay, so if you want any variables to be public, you add it with a prefix of next public underscore in the name of the variable right there. Okay, that's just to kind of keep you safe. So if Next.js sees this part right here, it will know that this you want it to be public. All the rest will be private. All right. So thank you guys. Now the other thing that I want to show you, just a couple of changes, just for learning purpose. Let's go to our pages articles index. Now there's a thing that I want to update in here as well. So if we go to our articles right here, just remember I didn't add any keys right here. So it was like this. But in Next.js, you're going to have a problem with this. Basically every one that we loop over around here, we have to add a key so that Next.js know which basic, in this case, which article is which one. All right. So if we add the key, so all we do is we add the key right here, the key, and then I'm just going to use the article ID as a key. All right. Just that part right there. Now the other thing as well is, let's go to the article right here. Now the other part that we have is I put it backticks like this. All we have to do is when we bring in an href like this, we mustn't leave it as such. It works, no problem. I can go to the different articles, but the convention, otherwise you're going to get an error. You have to put a /, not a dot /, just a / like that. So if I save this, I go to F12 right here, you'll see if I refresh this, if I click on this, we'll see we have no error. But if I remove this, let's quickly see the error right here. So let's save that and click on the article. Okay, it doesn't want to appear now, but just make sure that you add that in there. All right. So that's the end of this series, guys. If you have any questions, please ask them for me in the comment section, and I will put this in a longer format. There's obviously a lot to cover in Next.js, like the authentication, but I just wanted to give you guys the basics for our Laravel API that we're going to build, and that will be in the next coming videos coming up for our Laravel API, because in there we will deal with some advanced features like the authentication and SWR, and we're going to work with it in the next one. All right, so thank you guys for watching. Do all the YouTube stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.